On Tanna, fire did not destroy life, it shaped it. What the Europeans discovered here challenged their ideas of danger, fertility, and nature itself. Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Encounters, misunderstandings, and moments of danger shaped how Europeans interpreted the Pacific in the 18th century. This series is based on Captain James Cook's second voyage, observed and recorded by the young German naturalist Georg Forster. At this moment, the voyagers explore the island of Tanna, Vanuatu. What happened in the last episode? In the previous episode, the crew explored the interior of Tanna under the guidance of local islanders, moving through cultivated paths, plantations, and forested lands shaped by careful use. They approached the volcanic landscape, observing steam vents, sulfur deposits, and fertile soil, before being firmly warned away from the crater itself. Encounters alternated between hospitality and restraint, shared food, exchanged names, and moments of trust stood alongside alarm calls and clear boundaries, revealing an island where cooperation was possible, but never without limits. Friday, August 12, 1774, Island of Tanna, Vanuatu.
The Solfatara on the western mountain seemed, in every respect, worthy of closer investigation. So, the next morning they set out once more, this time accompanied by the painter, Mr. Hodges. The volcano thundered throughout the day and ejected a great deal of fine black ash, which, upon close inspection, was composed of long, needle-shaped, semi-transparent grains of tourmaline. This tourmaline sand covered the entire island, every plant, every leaf, so that while collecting botanical specimens, they had to break the leaves off with great care to avoid getting ash in their eyes and causing pain. This minor inconvenience was more than compensated for by the advantages the volcano brought to the islanders. The slag it expelled, especially once weathered, served as excellent fertilizer, greatly enhancing plant growth. Herbs and shrubs grew almost twice as tall, with broader leaves, larger blossoms, and more intense fragrance than elsewhere. This was true, to varying degrees, wherever volcanoes were found. In Italy, for example, the region around Mount Vesuvius was considered one of the most fertile and produced the finest wines. Mount Etna in Sicily had a similar reputation, and even the volcanic soil in the cold, barren region of the Habichtswald in Hesse was known for its remarkable fertility. The gardens laid out there by the Landgrave showed a wealth of native and foreign plants. What they had observed on various South Sea islands confirmed this idea completely. The Society Islands, the Marquesas, some of the Friendly Islands, as well as Ambrym and Tanna, all with active volcanoes, had fertile soil in which plants flourished. Even on Easter Island, still scarred by eruptions and consisting mostly of slag, scorched rock, and pumice, various herbs and edible roots were already growing, despite the intense heat of the sun, which might have suggested that no plant could survive there. Reflecting on these observations, they reached the lowest of the steaming vents of the Solfatara, but did not linger long, as several islanders were already visible higher up. Georg and his companions soon recognized them as the same friendly people they had met the day before, and saw that some had again been sent off, likely to fetch provisions. Mr. Hodges sat down and began sketching different views, while the others botanized and measured the heat of the Solfatara with a thermometer. At 8:30 a.m., when they had left the ship, the thermometer had read 25.5 degrees Celsius and had risen to 30.5 degrees Celsius from the warmth of the hand. After hanging for 5 minutes in open air about 18 meters from the Solfatara, it had dropped back to 26.7 degrees Celsius. They then dug a hole in the clay and suspended the thermometer inside on a crosswise stick. Within 30 seconds, it rose to 76.7 degrees Celsius and held steady for the next 4 minutes. As soon as it was removed, it dropped immediately to 71.1 degrees Celsius and gradually returned to 26.7 degrees Celsius after a few minutes. The islanders asked them to stop digging, warning that the flame could break through and trigger an eruption. Asur, as they called the volcano in their language. Every time they started digging again, the locals became visibly uneasy. Eventually, the men continued up the mountain and found several other similar steaming vents. Meanwhile, the islanders who had been sent ahead returned, bringing sugar cane and coconuts to offer hospitality, just as they had the day before. After this refreshment, they resumed their hike when some locals met them and pointed out a path that, they claimed, led directly to the volcano. The group followed them for several kilometers, but the trail wound constantly through the forest, offering no view of the surroundings. Then, quite unexpectedly, they found themselves back at the very beach they had set out from. The islanders had likely used this ruse to politely steer them away from their dwellings, which they clearly did not wish foreigners to approach. One of the men was particularly clever. The group asked him whether other islands lay nearby and what they were called. He gave several names, which, judging by his gestures, referred to places they had not yet visited. Such inquiries had to be handled carefully to avoid misunderstandings. Captain Cook, for instance, had once taken a list of names given by an islander to refer to neighboring islands, when in fact they had simply been the names of local districts on Tanna. To avoid repeating that mistake, Georg asked the man whether the names he had mentioned were also districts of Tanna. The man clearly denied this and added that the sea, Tassi, separated all those lands from one another. When they drew a few circles on paper to represent separate islands, he indicated they had understood him correctly. In the afternoon, they took a walk along the south side of the low ridge and discovered some new plants. A few locals offered to guide them across the ridge to the opposite shore. But based on the route they suggested, it quickly became clear that, like the others earlier that day, they were only trying to bring them back to the watering place. So the explorers parted from them and continued on alone, walking between fields, some of which were enclosed by reed hedges up to 2 meters high. Along the way, a more honest islander joined them and reliably led them to the opposite beach. There, they saw the island of Annatom for the second time. A bit farther north, according to this islander, lay another island called Itonga. Because of the great distance, it was not visible. This information supported Georg's earlier suspicion that the people of Tanna might be in contact with the inhabitants of the friendly islands through as yet unknown intermediary islands. The name Itonga closely resembled that of Tonga Taboo. Moreover, the people of Middleburg, or Eauwe, sometimes also referred to the same island as Itonga Taboo. The word taboo was used throughout the South Seas as an island suffix, for example, in Tabua Manu, Saunders Island, or Tabu I. However, Georg did not want to assert that the people of Tanna meant Tonga taboo exclusively when they spoke of Itonga. More likely, they referred to a different island of that name, situated somewhere between Tanna and the Friendly Islands, facilitating exchange. Once their curiosity was satisfied, the group returned to the watering place. In the meantime, the sailors had caught about 175 kilograms of fish. This abundant catch allowed Captain Cook to serve the entire crew a fresh meal, which was devoured with great appetite. The harbor was extremely rich in fish, and anyone fishing at night could be certain of a catch, especially albacore and cavalhas. On one of the days, 2 fish were also caught of the same kind that had once poisoned several men in Malikolo's waters. Georg had hoped to draw and describe this type as a warning for other seafarers, but the sailors were so eager for fresh food that they gave him no time. They thought neither of his good intentions nor of past incidents, and immediately cut the fish into pieces, seasoned them with salt and pepper, and tossed them into the pot. Fortunately, the fish caused no harm this time. Another sign, perhaps, that those earlier poisonous specimens had fed on toxic plants or insects, and thereby taken on harmful properties not inherent to their species. The sailors had based their risky meal on the result of a quick test. A silver spoon placed in the cooking water had remained untarnished, but this was no reliable method, as only certain poisons are capable of affecting silver at all. The islanders continued to sell yams, but overall, little was brought to market. Tortoiseshell was the only item they truly valued, but unfortunately, there were only a few small pieces left on the entire ship, which had been obtained by chance back in Tonga taboo and had ended up in the hands of some sailors. These had foolishly traded them for bows and arrows instead of using them to improve their miserable diet of salted meat with a supply of yams, for their own benefit and that of everyone else. Progress in botanical work was also slow. Despite their efforts, they had not yet discovered enough new plants to spend even a full day on board, drawing and describing them. So they went ashore every single day, searching here and there for new observations. On the 13th, Georg and his companions climbed the eastern hill to visit their friends who were staying with the old Pauvjangum. Both the curiosity and mistrust of the islanders had by now diminished so much that hardly anyone came to the beach anymore as often or as eagerly as before. On their walk from the watering place to the first plantations, they didn't encounter a single islander. Instead, they heard the sound of wood being chopped in the forest and spotted a man between the bushes, felling a tree with a stone axe. Though the trunk was only about 20 centimeters thick, the work seemed very laborious with such a crude tool. After watching the man unnoticed for a while, they approached. The woodcutter paused to speak with the strangers. The boys, who remembered them from their last visit, came running, called them by name, and brought handfuls of figs and jambus as gifts. Even the women dared to step forward and look at them. The axe the man had been using was shaped exactly like those used on the Friendly and Society Islands. The stone forming the blade was also the same, black and resembling basalt. The owner explained that the stone came from the nearby island of Annatom. He also showed them a second axe, in which, instead of a stone, a sharp piece of shell had been fixed. It appeared to come from a voluta mitra, bishop's mitre shell, and, according to the man, was brought from the small island of Immer, a few kilometers to the north. The man was in the process of clearing the land where they had met him, cutting down trees and bushes to prepare it for yam cultivation. he had already piled up many shrubs, which would later be burned. When Georg and his companions took their leave, they were accompanied by a group of boys and 2 older youths down to the opposite shore. On the way, they shot birds and collected various new herbs. The gardens in this area appeared better tended than elsewhere. They had not only been planted for practical use, but also for beauty. The men found many shrubs and herbs that seemed to have been cultivated either for their appearance or their fragrance. Among the fruit trees, the catappa tree, Terminalia catappa, stood out. Its tasty nuts were about twice the size of almond kernels. Because of the late season, the tree had already shed its leaves, but the fruits still hung from the branches. The young boys cracked the nuts between 2 stones and offered the kernels to Georg and his father on green leaves. The children were as helpful as the Tahitians, though without any selfish intent. If Georg or his father wanted more of a particular plant, they only had to show it, and the islanders would search until they found it. No bird was safe from their eagerness to see the foreigners shoot. Even if a bird was perched high up or well hidden, they would spot it and be thrilled when a shot struck true. Around every house wandered a few well-fed pigs and some chickens. Now and then, rats scurried across the path. These were of the common kind, and mostly stayed in the sugar-cane fields, where they caused great damage. To get rid of them, the islanders had dug many deep pits at the edges of the fields, where they regularly trapped the pests. On their way back to the beach, they walked a long stretch along the shore. Taking a detour, they attempted to reach the eastern headland of the bay from the north, since the islanders had repeatedly turned them away on the southern side. Near the shore stood a few small huts that looked like fishermen's shelters. Had that been the case, Georg and his companions would have had to abandon their earlier theory that the people of Tanna made little use of fishing. But no people, nets, or fish were to be seen. Only a few throwing spears, which might have served as simple harpoons. When their islander companions saw that the Europeans were continuing toward the headland, they became visibly distressed. They urgently asked them not to enter that part of the island, and finally threatened that, if they refused, they would be killed and eaten. So they turned back. It was now the 3rd time the islanders had, through unmistakable signs, admitted to being cannibals. This barbarity, then, had to be truly widespread among them. Cannibalism is often explained as a consequence of extreme food scarcity. But Tanna had plenty of fertile land, offering its people nourishing plants, roots, and even domestic animals. Much more likely, this cruel custom had arisen out of a spirit of vengeance. Self-preservation is undoubtedly the first law of nature. To secure it, nature placed passions in the human heart. In civilized societies, the punishment of wrongs is entrusted to institutions. Among indigenous peoples, by contrast, each person takes justice into their own hands. Even the smallest insult can ignite intense feelings of revenge. This hostile emotion is as natural as the gentler one of compassion. As opposed as they may seem, both are key driving forces that, through their interplay, hold social structures together. A human without compassion is rightly seen as a monster. But one who cannot be provoked is equally contemptible, for such a person would let themselves be insulted by any scoundrel without resisting. A people or family, since larger social groups are rare among these cultures, who are frequently attacked, gradually develop hatred and a thirst for vengeance. This attitude inevitably leads to cruelty, and when deceit and betrayal come into play, mistrust follows. Over time, a spirit of hostility and malice takes root, one that permits a person to inflict the worst on their enemies. In such circumstances, the mere appearance of an insult is enough to send a warrior to arms, and if he is truly provoked, he trusts in the right of the stronger and attacks with a fury capable of the most excessive cruelty. Women who already had children and were around 30 years old had lost the youthful shape of their bodies. Their skirts reached from hip to ankle. The younger girls, around 14, however, had pleasant facial features. They were especially charming thanks to a gentle smile that, as their shyness faded, became increasingly warm and friendly. Most of them were very slender. Their arms were fine and delicate, their breasts round and full, and their short skirts barely reached their knees. Their curly hair hung uncut and naturally around their necks, giving them an appealing appearance. Many wore a green banana leaf as headwear, which created a pleasing contrast with their dark hair. In their ears, they wore tortoiseshell rings. The number of such ornaments increased with age. The fewer the charms, the more the jewelry. The oldest and least attractive women therefore wore necklaces, numerous earrings, nose pendants, and arm rings. The men showed the women no respect. The women obeyed the slightest signal and, according to the sailors, often carried heavy loads, like pack animals. This physical burden likely exceeded their strength, and was probably partly responsible for their frail and small stature. But among all uncivilized peoples, it was customary to deny women basic human rights. They were treated as inferior beings. The idea of finding happiness and joy in companionship with a woman only developed with a higher level of culture. As long as human beings were preoccupied with mere survival, there was little room for refined feelings between the sexes. Interaction was limited to physical needs. The savage saw in the woman's weakness and gentleness not a reason for care, but rather a justification for domination. The urge for power was innate, and in the state of nature so strong that it was enforced even at the expense of the weak. Only with growing population, when the burden of securing food no longer rested on each individual alone, but was shared by the community, did the degree of morality increase. Scarcity gave way to abundance, the spirit became freer, and began to enjoy the gentler pleasures of life. The desire for relaxation and joy emerged, along with the wish to know and appreciate the kind qualities of the opposite sex. Even so, even the roughest savage was capable of a certain tenderness and affection. This was most visible in childhood, while they still ran about carefree. But as they grew older and had to care for themselves, the instinct of self-preservation quickly displaced all less urgent emotions. The originally innate passions were the only ones that continued alongside the survival instinct, and these remained constant in all regions of the world. Among them was fatherly love, which Georg witnessed movingly that evening. A little, pretty girl of about 8 tried to sneak a look at him and Dr. Sparman through the heads of the seated crowd. But when she realized she had been noticed, she ran quickly back to her hut. Georg showed her a piece of Tahitian cloth and beckoned her to come and get it. But she didn't dare. Finally, her father stood up and gently persuaded her to come closer. Georg then kindly took the girl by the hand, gave her the cloth and a few small trinkets, and saw with joy how his child's happiness lit up the father's face, and gratitude shone in his eyes. They remained with these friendly islanders until sunset, listening to their songs and admiring their skill with weapons. The men shot their arrows either straight up into the air or horizontally at a target, depending on the guests' wishes. They couldn't shoot particularly high, but at close range, as Georg had already noted, they were excellent marksmen. They also knew how to deflect throwing spears with clubs or club-like weapons almost as effectively as the Tahitians. These clubs had protruding lugs on either side, flat and shaped somewhat like the lancets used by veterinarians, just as Georg had previously described. According to the Tanisi, these weapons came from the low-lying island of Immer. Whether they were made by people living there, or whether the island was uninhabited and only visited for gathering shells and logging, could not be determined. Before the researchers took their leave, the women lit fires for the evening meal, some inside, others outside the huts. Men and children huddled around them, as the evening chill was quite noticeable on bare skin. Some of those present suffered from swelling of the upper eyelid. This appeared to result from the habit of sitting often in smoke. The affected had to tilt their heads back to align their eyes with whatever they were looking at. The condition was already visible in boys as young as 5 or 6, suggesting it might be hereditary. By the time they returned to the beach, most of the islanders had already gone to rest, and soon Georg and his companions found themselves completely alone. What had been an unpleasant evening chill for the naked islanders was felt by the clothed Europeans as refreshing. They wandered through the forest alone for quite some time. At dusk, many bats emerged from their hiding places. Almost every bush released one, but they didn't manage to hit any. The creatures were too fast and too hard to see to be targeted. The sailors had been equally unsuccessful in fishing. After long effort, they carried the nets back to the boat, having caught barely more than 24 fish.
For now, this part of the voyage comes to an end. If you'd like to continue the journey, you can explore other episodes of the series, follow the route on the map, or see how these places look today through the links in the show notes and on my Voyage to Go channel. And if you enjoy the podcast and would like to support my work, you'll find a PayPal link there as well. Subscribing and sharing the series helps just as much. Because life is a journey, being part of it is everything.